The judge's words fell like stones, each one a weight crushing the air from Nia Jackson's lungs. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Life. The word was an absurdity. She was 17. She had a calculus test next Tuesday, a half-finished painting on her easel, a dog who slept on her bed. Life was college applications and arguments with her mom about curfew. It wasn't this. This fluorescent-lit room in San Diego, this scratchy jumpsuit, this man on a high bench erasing her future with a flick of his tongue. The gavel struck wood, the sound echoing the finality of a coffin lid closing. The air in Department 12 of the Edward J. Schwartz Federal Building was stale, recycled, and thick with the ghosts of lives adjudicated. Nia felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's tragedy. The imposing room, with its dark wood paneling and the Great Seal of the United States looming behind the judge's chair, was designed to make you feel small, insignificant. It was working. Her public defender, a harried man named Mr. Davies with a coffee-stained tie and weary eyes, had patted her hand once before the judge entered. "Just stay calm, Nia," he'd whispered, his breath smelling of stale coffee and defeat. "We'll appeal." But an appeal felt like a distant, academic concept. The reality was Judge Arthur Sterling, a man in his late 60s with a crown of silver hair and a face that seemed permanently fixed in a mask of mild disappointment. He looked at Nia not as a child, but as a statistic, another unfortunate entry in his docket. Throughout the trial, he had been dismissive. He'd overruled Mr. Davies' objections with an impatient wave of his hand, while sustaining the prosecutors with thoughtful nods. He had listened to the prosecution paint a picture of Nia as a willing accomplice, a cold-hearted lookout in a botched convenience store robbery that had ended in the owner's death. They'd twisted her silence, a silence born of terror and terrible advice from her so-called friends, into a sign of guilt. The core of the prosecution's case rested on the felony murder rule, a legal doctrine that felt like a cruel trick. Because she had been in the car, because she had known the others were going to rob the store, the law held her just as responsible for the death as the boy who had panicked and pulled the trigger. It didn't matter that she had never left the vehicle. It didn't matter that she had screamed at them to stop. "Miss Jackson?" Judge Sterling began, his voice a low, resonant drone that filled the cavernous courtroom. He removed his glasses and polished them with a handkerchief, a small piece of theater that made the moment stretch into an eternity. "You had every advantage. A good home, a sharp mind, yet you chose to squander it. You chose a path of violence and criminality. Every word was a lie." She hadn't chosen this. She had chosen to trust a boy, Jamal, who had a charming smile and a broken moral compass. She'd made a stupid 17-year-old's mistake, a mistake for which others might get a lecture, maybe probation. But she was a black girl in a courtroom that saw her skin before it saw her humanity. And a man was dead. The victim's family sat in the front row, their faces etched with a grief so raw it was painful to look at. Nia's heart ached for them. She had tried to express her remorse in a statement Mr. Davies had read, but the words felt hollow, inadequate. How could they possibly convey the depth of her shame and sorrow? "The law is clear on this matter," the judge continued, putting his glasses back on. "Participation in a felony that results in a death makes you as culpable as the one who committed the act itself. This court finds no reason to deviate from the sentencing guidelines." He didn't look at her as he said it. He looked at a file on his desk. He was sentencing a file, not a person. Not a girl who loved painting sunsets and debating constitutional law, who dreamed of attending Howard University. Therefore, pursuant to California Penal Code Section 189, the court sentences you, Nia Jackson, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds. Then the meaning crashed down, a tidal wave of panic and despair. Her breath hitched. The room tilted. Mr. Davies put a hand on her shoulder, but she barely felt it. She saw the grim satisfaction on the prosecutor's face. She saw the tears streaming down the face of the victim's daughter. She saw the 2 U.S. Marshals standing by the side door, their hands resting near their belts, ready to escort her from this room to a cage. Life. The gavel fell, and the sound shattered the last fragile remnants of her hope. This was it. This was the end of her story. 6 months ago, Nia's world was Oak Park, Illinois, a vibrant, tree-lined suburb of Chicago, known for its Frank Lloyd Wright architecture and its liberal, educated populace. Her life was a carefully constructed symphony of AP classes, debate club practice, and long hours in the art studio, the scent of turpentine and oil paint clinging to her clothes. Her biggest worry was perfecting the chiaroscuro in her latest piece and crafting a winning argument for the state debate finals. Her mother, Monica Carter, was a constant, powerful presence. To Nia, she was just Mom, the woman who made impossibly good lemon ricotta pancakes on Saturdays, who could eviscerate a politician's flawed logic on the evening news without raising her voice, and who always had time to review Nia's essays, pushing her to think more critically, to write more clearly. Monica was a constitutional lawyer, a fact Nia mentioned with pride, though she didn't fully grasp the scope of her mother's influence. Monica traveled often for work, speaking at conferences and consulting on complex cases, her schedule a whirlwind of flights and meetings. Their home was filled with books on law and history, and dinner conversations often revolved around court precedents and civil rights. It was Monica who had encouraged her to apply for the summer arts program at the University of California, San Diego. "Expand your horizons, Nia," she'd said, her smile warm. "Go see a different part of the world. Just promise to call every day." San Diego was a sun-drenched paradise, a world away from the humid Chicago summer. The art program was everything she had hoped for. Her instructors praised her unique style, her bold use of color. For the first time, she felt like a true artist. And then she met Jamal. He wasn't in the arts program. He was a local, working a summer job at the campus coffee shop. He had a quick, easy laugh and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He told her she was beautiful and talented, and when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that was new and intoxicating. He introduced her to his friends, a tight-knit group from his neighborhood. They were different from her friends back home, a little rougher, their laughter louder, their stories edgier. They treated her like a novelty, the smart, pretty girl from out of town. She was flattered by the attention. For a few weeks, it was thrilling. They drove down the coast with the windows down, music blasting. They had bonfires on the beach, the Pacific Ocean a vast, dark mystery before them. She knew, on some level, that they were trouble. She ignored the way they always paid in cash, the vague stories about how they made their money. Jamal was sweet to her, and that's what she focused on. She was a 17-year-old girl in the throes of her first real romance, and she allowed herself to be willfully blind. The day it happened was hazy, one of those Southern California days where the sun burns through a thin layer of marine fog. Jamal picked her up in his friend's beat-up sedan. The other 2 boys, Marcus and Leo, were in the back. The mood was different. Tense, wired. Marcus was tapping his leg nervously, and Leo was unusually quiet. "We just gotta make a quick stop," Jamal said, avoiding her eyes. He pulled up near a small, unassuming convenience store in a strip mall. The sun beat down on the cracked asphalt. "What's going on?" Nia asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "Just wait here. We'll be right back," Jamal said. He leaned over and kissed her, a quick, desperate peck. Then he and the others got out of the car. Marcus pulled his hoodie up. And then she saw it. Tucked into the waistband of Leo's jeans was the black handle of a gun. Ice flooded her veins. "Jamal, no!" she yelled, her voice thin and reedy. "Don't do this!" But they were already walking toward the store, their shoulders hunched. The bell over the door chimed as they went inside. Nia's mind raced. Call the police! Drive away! But the keys were in the ignition, and her body was frozen with a paralyzing fear. Seconds stretched into minutes. She could hear shouting from inside the store. A woman screamed, then a pop, a single sickeningly flat sound. The boys burst out of the store, their faces pale with panic. They scrambled into the car. "Go, go, go!" Marcus screamed. Jamal fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. He threw the car into reverse, tires squealing as he peeled out of the parking lot. Nia was sobbing, her body trembling uncontrollably. "What did you do?" she shrieked. "What did you do?" "He wasn't supposed to have a gun," Jamal stammered, his voice cracking. "The old man, he reached for something. Leo he just freaked out." They were picked up less than an hour later. The police pulled them over, guns drawn. Nia was yanked from the car and slammed onto the hot hood, her face pressed against the metal. The last thing she saw before being pushed into the back of a police cruiser was Jamal's face, contorted in a mask of fear and regret. That was the last time she ever saw him. He and the others had taken plea deals, their lawyers painting Nia as the mastermind, the sophisticated outsider who had planned the whole thing. It was a lie, but in the face of their testimony, her story of a naive girl who made a terrible mistake sounded like a flimsy excuse. And so she found herself in a courtroom in San Diego, on trial for a life she didn't take, her own life hanging in the balance. Washington, D.C. operated on its own unique frequency, a low hum of ambition and power that vibrated through the marble halls of government. In her chambers, a quiet, book-lined sanctuary insulated from the city's noise, Monica Carter was reviewing amicus briefs for an upcoming case. The air smelled of old paper, lemon tea, and the faint, floral scent of the orchid on her desk. Light from the tall, arched window illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. She worked with a focused, methodical intensity that had defined her entire career. From a scholarship kid at Yale Law to a respected appellate judge, her ascent had been fueled by a formidable intellect and an unshakable belief in the clarifying power of the law. Her phone, set to vibrate, buzzed against the polished mahogany of her desk. It was a number she didn't recognize, from a San Diego area code. Annoyed at the interruption, she let it go to voicemail. A moment later, it buzzed again. And again, a sliver of unease pierced her concentration. She picked up. "This is Monica Carter." "Ms. Carter, my name is Daniel Davies. I'm Nia Jackson's public defender in San Diego." The voice was rushed, frayed with stress. Monica's blood ran cold. Every maternal instinct, every carefully suppressed fear she'd harbored since Nia had left for California, surged to the surface. "What's happened? Is Nia all right? There's been a verdict and a sentencing." Monica's knuckles were white where she gripped the phone. "A sentencing? Her trial wasn't supposed to be for another 2 months. I was flying out next week to finalize her defense team." She had been vetting the best and most expensive criminal defense lawyers in California. The prosecutor pushed the date up. Judge Sterling agreed. "It all happened very fast," Davies stammered, the sound of shuffling papers crackling over the line. "They offered her a last-minute deal, 25 to life. She refused it. She insisted she was innocent. We went straight to sentencing." Monica closed her eyes, a wave of nausea washing over her. She knew the type of judge who would pull a move like this. She knew the type of prosecutor. And she knew how they would see her daughter. "What was the sentence, Mr. Davies?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. There was a pause. She could hear him take a shaky breath. Life, without the possibility of parole. For a moment, there was only silence. In that silence, Monica Carter, the brilliant legal mind, the measured jurist, ceased to exist. There was only Nia's mother. A primal scream of anguish and rage built in her chest, but she swallowed it down, converting it into a core of ice-cold fury. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. "Listen to me very carefully, Mr. Davies," she said, her tone now stripped of all emotion, leaving only steel. "You will file an immediate notice of appeal. You will also file a motion to stay the sentence pending that appeal. Cite procedural error on the accelerated trial date and ineffective assistance of counsel. That's you, in case you were wondering." "Ms. Carter, do not interrupt me," she commanded, her authority absolute. "Get a court reporter to the marshal's office at the courthouse. I want a verbatim transcript of every word my daughter has said since she was taken into custody. Have it emailed to me within the hour. Is that clear?" "Yes, but—" "And Mr. Davies," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more menacing than any shout, "if they have put my daughter in restraints, you will inform the supervising marshal that he will be named in a federal civil rights lawsuit by sunrise tomorrow." She hung up before he could reply. Her movements were swift, precise. She called her clerk. "Cancel my schedule for the rest of the week. Everything. Tell the Chief Justice I have a family emergency of the gravest nature." Next, she called a number from memory. "Walter, it's Monica. I need the jet. I'm going to San Diego, now." Finally, she dialed her oldest and most trusted friend, a man who ran one of the most powerful law firms in the country. "Ben, it's me. It's Nia. I need you to meet me in San Diego. Bring your 2 best appellate litigators. The government has made a mistake. They have taken my child, and I am going to burn them to the ground." As she packed a small bag in her office, her hands were steady, but her heart felt as if it were splintering in her chest. She looked at the photo on her desk. Nia at 10 years old, grinning, a gap between her front teeth, her hair in 2 messy braids. A wave of love so fierce it was physically painful washed over her. They didn't know who they had done this to. They didn't know whose daughter they had just tried to bury. But they were about to find out. Back in Department 12, the world had shrunk to a suffocatingly small space. The 2 U.S. Marshals moved toward Nia. One was a tall, stern-faced man, the other a woman with a weary, practiced neutrality in her eyes. The sound of a key and handcuffs clicked, a small metallic sound that echoed the finality of the gavel. Nia's legs felt like lead. She couldn't move. Her mind was a maelstrom of denial and terror. This couldn't be happening. In a moment, she would wake up in her dorm room in UCSD, the morning sun streaming through the blinds, and this whole nightmare would dissolve. Judge Sterling was gathering his papers, eager to move on to the next case, the next life to be adjudicated and filed away. He glanced at Nia, a flicker of something, not pity, but perhaps annoyance at her stunned inaction, crossing his face. "Let's go, miss," the male marshal said, his voice not unkind but firm. Mr. Davies, her public defender, looked utterly defeated. He put a hand on her arm. "Nia, we have to—" His voice trailed off, helpless, and then something inside Nia snapped. The shock gave way to a desperate, searing blaze of indignation. She wouldn't be erased. She would not be a silent statistic in a file. She found her voice, raw and shaking, but clear. "No." The marshals paused. Judge Sterling looked up, his brow furrowed. "I want to say something," Nia said, her voice growing stronger. She looked directly at the judge, ignoring the marshals beside her. "You didn't let me speak. Not really. You read my statement, but you didn't let me speak." Judge Sterling sighed, a theatrical display of waning patience. "Miss Jackson, the sentencing is concluded. This is not the time for speeches. With all due respect, sir," Nia said, the formal words of her debate training a strange armor. You have just sentenced me to die in a cage. I think I've earned the right to a few words." The judge's eyes narrowed. He was not a man accustomed to being challenged, especially by a teenage defendant. He saw her not as a citizen demanding her rights, but as a criminal showing a lack of remorse. "You talk about my wasted potential," Nia continued, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "You don't know anything about my potential. You don't know anything about me. You know a story that a prosecutor told you, a story that made his job easier." She turned her head and looked at the victim's family. Tears welled in her eyes. "I am so sorry for your loss," she said, her voice cracking. "I will live with the shame of my part in this for the rest of my life, however long that is. But I did not pull a trigger. I did not want this to happen. I am not a monster. I was a stupid, scared kid who made a mistake, and you are throwing my life away." Judge Sterling's face hardened into a mask of cold authority. He was losing control of his courtroom. "That is enough, Miss Jackson," he said, his voice sharp and menacing. "Your outburst is doing you no favors. It demonstrates a complete lack of contrition. Marshals, remove her. Now." The marshals moved in, their professionalism overriding any hesitation. The male marshal took her left arm, the female one her right. The cold metal of the handcuffs snapped around her wrist. Humiliation washed over Nia, hot and sharp. They were treating her like an animal. She was being silenced, physically removed, her last plea for dignity ignored. The prosecutor, a smug young man named Peterson, watched with a look of vindication. He had won. He had secured a life sentence, a notch on his belt that would help his career. As the marshals began to lead her toward the side door, the one that led not back to the world but to the labyrinthine corridors of the justice system, Nia's eyes scanned the courtroom one last time. It was a blur of indifferent faces, of clerks and lawyers and onlookers. There was no one here for her. Her mother, her brilliant, powerful mother, was thousands of miles away, oblivious. The feeling of absolute, crushing loneliness was the most painful blow of all. She stumbled, her legs refusing to cooperate. The female marshal held her up, preventing her from collapsing. The door was just a few feet away. Behind it lay a future of concrete and steel, of clanging doors and numbered days. This was it. The end. Just as the marshal's hand reached for the handle of the door, the main courtroom doors at the back of the chamber swung open with a firm, authoritative thud. The sound cut through the quiet hum of the courtroom, sharp and unexpected. Every head turned. Two figures stood silhouetted against the bright light of the hallway. They stepped inside, and the doors swung shut behind them, closing with a soft, pneumatic hiss. The first was a tall man with graying temples and an impeccably tailored suit, his face a mask of stern composure. The second was a woman, younger with a sharp, intelligent gaze, carrying a leather briefcase. They scanned the room with the practiced eyes of people who were accustomed to assessing situations quickly and decisively. They parted, creating a path. Through that path walked a third figure, a woman. She was of average height, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit. Her hair was styled in a neat, professional cut. She walked not with haste, but with a deliberate, unshakable purpose that seemed to draw all the energy in the room toward her. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes, fixed on the scene at the front of the courtroom, on the judge, the marshals, and the girl in the jumpsuit between them, burned with an intensity that was incandescent. It was her mother. Nia's heart leaped into her throat. A choked sob escaped her lips. "Mom!" Monica Carter's eyes met her daughter's for a fleeting second. In that fractional moment, Nia saw it all: the terror, the fury, the boundless, ferocious love. But then her mother's gaze shifted, moving past Nia to fix squarely on Judge Arthur Sterling. The judge, irritated by this dramatic, unscheduled interruption, scowled from the bench. "This is a restricted area. Who are you? Court is in session. The marshals, holding Naya's arms, had frozen, caught between their duty and the sheer force of authority radiating from the woman walking down the aisle. Monica did not stop or slow her pace. The click of her heels on the linoleum floor was the only sound in the now silent room. The two people who had entered with her followed a few paces behind. "This court is no longer in session," Monica said, her voice calm and clear, yet carrying to every corner of the room. It was a voice accustomed to being listened to, a voice that did not brook argument. Judge Sterling's face flushed with anger. The audacity of this woman was unbelievable. "I am Judge Arthur Sterling, and I will have you removed for contempt. Who do you think you are?" Monica stopped at the bar that separated the gallery from the court. She placed her hands on the wooden rail. She looked at the judge, at the prosecutor, at the American flag standing beside the bench. She took a slow, deliberate breath. Nia watched, her mind reeling. Her mother was here. But what could she do? She was a lawyer, yes, but this was a federal court. The sentence had been passed. The gavel had fallen. It was over. But as she looked at her mother's face, at the absolute, unwavering certainty in her eyes, a tiny, impossible flicker of hope ignited in the desolate wasteland of her heart. Her mother wasn't just a lawyer. Nia had never understood. Her mother was something more. The air crackled with tension. The smug look on the prosecutor's face had been replaced by one of confusion. Mr. Davies looked on, his mouth agape. Judge Sterling, puffed up with indignation, was about to unleash his judicial wrath. "Bailiff!" he barked. "Remove these people from my courtroom!" The bailiff, an older man, took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, seemingly pinned in place by the woman's unblinking stare. The moment stretched, taut and fragile. And then Monica Carter spoke again, her voice still quiet, yet utterly devastating. "You will do nothing of the sort, bailiff," Monica said, her voice cutting through the judge's bluster with the precision of a scalpel. She did not raise it. She didn't have to. The authority was not in the volume, but in the marrow of the words themselves. She turned her attention back to the man on the bench, who was now sputtering with rage. "And you, Judge Sterling," she continued, her tone laced with a cold, hard contempt, "will return to your seat, and you will listen, because it seems you have forgotten the very foundation of the law you are supposed to represent." The prosecutor, Peterson, finally found his voice. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. This woman needs to be arrested." The man who had entered with Monica stepped forward. "I would advise against that, Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice a low baritone. "My name is Benjamin Thorne. I am Ms. Carter's legal counsel, and you are seconds away from committing a career-ending mistake." The name landed in the courtroom like a thunderclap. Benjamin Thorne was not just any lawyer. He was a legend, a litigator who argued regularly before the highest court in the land. His presence here, in this regional courtroom, was an anomaly of seismic proportions. Judge Sterling's face went from red to a pasty white. He knew the name. Every judge, every lawyer in the country knew that name. His bluster deflated, replaced by a dawning, sickening sense of dread. He sank back into his chair, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. Who was this woman? Monica Carter took a step forward, past the bar, into the well of the court. The marshals instinctively released Naya's arms. Nia, numb and bewildered, stumbled forward, her mother's presence a gravitational force pulling her in. Monica put a steadying hand on her daughter's shoulder, a brief, reassuring touch, before turning her full, undivided attention back to the bench. "You asked me who I am," she said, her voice ringing with clarity in the stunned silence. "My name is Monica Carter. I am Nia Jackson's mother." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Then she delivered the final, devastating blow. "And for the last 3 years, I have had the honor of serving as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States." If Thorne's name was a thunderclap, this was a cataclysm. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keys. Mr. Davies looked as though he might faint. The prosecutor, Peterson, physically recoiled, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Judge Arthur Sterling, the man who moments ago held the power of life and death, looked as if he had seen a ghost. His entire world had just been turned upside down. This wasn't just a lawyer's mother. This was one of the 9 people who held the ultimate legal authority in the nation. He had just sentenced her daughter to die in prison, lecturing her with condescending, biased platitudes as he did so. Monica's eyes were like chips of obsidian. There was no triumph in them, only a cold, righteous fury. "I have read the preliminary transcript of this proceeding," she said, the word dripping with disdain, "and I have never, in my entire career, witnessed such a flagrant, malicious disregard for due process and fundamental justice." She began to pace slowly before the bench, her voice a low, controlled lecture, the kind she might deliver to a group of first-year law students, but infinitely more terrifying. "You accelerated the trial date without due cause, denying the defense adequate time to prepare. A clear violation of the 6th Amendment. You allowed the prosecution to introduce co-conspirator testimony without adequate corroboration, a textbook violation of evidence standards. You have shown clear and demonstrable bias from the bench, referring to the defendant's culture, a thinly veiled racial stereotype that has no place in any courtroom, let alone a federal one." She stopped and looked directly at Sterling. "And you have applied the felony murder rule, a legal fiction that has been abolished in many civilized jurisdictions, to a 17-year-old child with no prior record, who never touched a weapon and never left the vehicle. You have done so not in the interest of justice, but in the interest of expediency, and, I suspect, a deep-seated prejudice you are too arrogant to even recognize in yourself." She turned to Peterson, the prosecutor, who looked physically ill. "And you, sir? You will be facing a Bar Association inquiry for prosecutorial misconduct, for coercing testimony, and for deliberately misrepresenting evidence to the court. Mr. Thorne will see to that personally." The power dynamic had not just flipped. It had been annihilated. The authority in the room no longer resided on the elevated bench. It stood on the floor, clad in a navy blue suit, calm, implacable, and absolute. Naya watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was her mother. This quiet, bookish woman who made pancakes and corrected her grammar was a warrior, a titan. The shame and humiliation that had crushed her just moments before began to recede, replaced by a surging tide of awe and a fierce, burning pride. Her mother had come for her, and she had brought the full weight of the United States Constitution with her. The silence that followed Monica's indictment was absolute. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath. The machinery of the court, usually so inexorable, had ground to a halt. Judge Sterling, pale and trembling, finally broke the silence. His voice was a hoarse whisper, all his previous arrogance stripped away, leaving only the raw, panicked voice of a man who saw his entire career, his legacy, crumbling to dust before his eyes. "Justice Carter, I was not aware. There has been a misunderstanding." Monica's expression did not soften. "There has been no misunderstanding, Judge. There has been an injustice, and it ends now." She turned to Benjamin Thorne. "Mr. Thorne." Thorne stepped forward, holding a single sheet of paper. "Your Honor," he began, the honorific now sounding like a bitter irony. "We have already electronically filed a notice of appeal with the Ninth Circuit. We have also filed an emergency motion to stay the sentence and release the defendant on her own recognizance, pending the outcome of that appeal. Given the extraordinary circumstances and the numerous egregious constitutional violations in this case, We expect it to be granted swiftly." He placed the paper on the prosecutor's table. Peterson stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "Furthermore," Thorne continued, his voice resonating with quiet power, "we will be petitioning for the immediate recusal of Judge Sterling from this case, and indeed from any future cases involving juvenile defendants, on the grounds of manifest judicial bias." Sterling flinched as if he'd been struck. Recusal was a deep stain on a judge's record. A petition like this, coming from a lawyer like Thorne and backed by the implicit weight of a Supreme Court justice, was not a petition. It was a command. Monica stepped forward again. "The sentence you imposed on my daughter is null and void," she stated, not as a request, but as a fact. "The marshals will release her into my custody immediately." The two marshals looked from Monica to the judge, their professional loyalties thrown into chaos. For their entire careers, the judge was the ultimate authority in the room. But now? Now, they were faced with a member of the highest court in the nation, a woman who interpreted the very laws they were sworn to uphold. Judge Sterling, desperate to staunch the bleeding, saw his only way out. He had to capitulate, completely and utterly. The motion to stay the sentence is granted," he stammered, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip his pen. "The defendant, Miss Jackson, is to be released on her own recognizance, effective immediately." He looked at the marshals. "Release her." The female marshal produced a key and, with a quiet click, unlocked the handcuffs from Naya's wrist. The cold metal fell away. Naya rubbed her skin, a raw red mark already forming. She looked at her hands, free. She looked at her mother, standing tall and resolute. The relief was so sudden, so overwhelming, it almost brought her to her knees. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of shock, of release, of a profound, earth-shattering gratitude. Monica walked to her daughter and wrapped her in her arms. Nia buried her face in her mother's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably, the terror and tension of the past months pouring out of her. Monica held her tight, her own composure finally cracking as she felt the tremors running through her daughter's body. She closed her eyes, hiding her own tears, whispering into Nia's hair, "I've got you. It's over. I've got you." Across the courtroom, the new reality was settling in. Peterson, the prosecutor, was slumped in his chair, his face in his hands. His brilliant career move had just become a spectacular act of self-immolation. Mr. Davies, the public defender, looked on with a mixture of awe and shame. He had failed his client, and it had taken an almost literal deus ex machina to save her. Benjamin Thorne and his associate were already on their phones, speaking in low, urgent tones, setting in motion the legal machinery that would not only exonerate Naya, but would hold every person involved in this travesty accountable. As Monica led her daughter away from the bench and down the center aisle, the people in the gallery, the other defendants' families, the law clerks, the onlookers, parted for them as if they were royalty. They were witnessing more than a courtroom drama. They were witnessing a fundamental reordering of power, a moment when the system, so often blind and brutal, was forced to look itself in the mirror. As they reached the heavy doors, Naya looked back one last time. Judge Arthur Sterling was still on the bench, but he looked smaller now, a diminished figure swallowed by the shadows of his grand courtroom. He was no longer a symbol of power. He was just a man who had made a terrible, terrible mistake. He had judged the wrong girl, and in doing so had brought judgment down upon himself. The events in Department 12 did not remain a secret for long. A clerk in the courtroom, sensing the magnitude of the story, made an anonymous call to a reporter at the Los Angeles Times. By the next morning, the headline was on the front page: Supreme Court Justice's daughter, sentenced to life. Mother intervenes in shocking courtroom confrontation. The story exploded. It was the lead item on every news channel, a trending topic on every social media platform. The quiet, academic world of the judiciary was thrust into a harsh, public spotlight. Pundits debated the ethics of Justice Carter's intervention, but the overwhelming public sentiment was one of outrage at the original sentence. Naya's story, the story of a promising student nearly swallowed whole by a merciless legal doctrine, became a symbol of a justice system gone wrong. For Judge Arthur Sterling, the reckoning was swift and brutal. The Ninth Circuit's Judicial Council immediately launched a formal investigation. Faced with overwhelming evidence of bias and procedural misconduct and the public humiliation of having his actions exposed, Sterling opted for a quiet retirement, a disgraced end to a long career. His name became a cautionary tale in law schools, a synonym for judicial arrogance. The San Diego U.S. Attorney's Office, facing a firestorm of negative press and a formal complaint from Benjamin Thorne's firm, launched its own internal review. The prosecutor, Peterson, was quietly reassigned to a desk job, his dreams of a fast-track career in ruins. The case against Nia Jackson was officially dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could never be tried for the crime again. But the ripples spread far beyond the individuals involved. The case sparked a fierce national debate about the felony murder rule. Civil rights groups, legal scholars, and even some conservative lawmakers pointed to Naya's case as a prime example of the doctrine's inherent unfairness, particularly in its application to juveniles. Editorials were written. Documentaries were planned. For the first time in decades, there was a serious, bipartisan conversation about reform. Months later, the chill of a Chicago autumn had replaced the relentless San Diego sun. Nia was home. The legal battle was over, but the emotional one was just beginning. She spent hours in her art studio, filling canvases not with the bright landscapes of her past, but with darker, more abstract expressions of fear, isolation, and, slowly, resilience. The girl who had left for California full of naive excitement was gone forever. In her place was a young woman who had stared into the abyss and had been forced to find a strength she never knew she possessed. One evening, Monica found her sitting in the studio, staring at a half-finished canvas, a chaotic swirl of black, gray, and a single defiant slash of brilliant yellow. "It's not finished," Nia said quietly, not looking at her mother. "Nothing is, I suppose," Monica replied, her voice soft. She walked over and stood behind her daughter, placing her hands on her shoulders. For a long time, they just stood there, the silence filled with everything they had been through. "I never told you," Nia said, her voice thick with emotion. "About what I did. I was so stupid, Mom. I knew they were trouble, I saw the gun, and I just froze. I did nothing." Monica's grip on her shoulders tightened. "You were a child, Nia. You were scared. You made a mistake. You did not deserve to have your life thrown away for it." Nia finally turned, her eyes filled with tears. "When you walked into that courtroom, I didn't understand. I just knew you as Mom. I had no idea who you really were." Monica smiled, a sad, weary smile. "I am your mom. That is who I really am. The rest of it, the job, the title, that is just what I do. And if I can't use it to protect my own child, then it's meaningless." She paused, her gaze distant. "But it shouldn't have taken me walking into that room to get you justice, Nia. The system should have worked. The law should have protected you. It failed. And that is a failure I have to live with, and a failure I have to spend the rest of my career trying to fix." In that moment, something shifted in Nia. The anger and the fear began to recede, replaced by a nascent sense of purpose. Her experience had been a nightmare, but it had also given her a terrifying, intimate understanding of the stakes. She had seen the system from the inside, had felt its crushing weight, and she had seen how the calm, unwavering voice of one person with knowledge and authority could bring that system to its knees. She looked at her canvas, at the defiant slash of yellow. It wasn't just a painting anymore. It was a promise. She would not let her story be just a story. It would be a catalyst. She would follow her mother's path, not as a Supreme Court justice, but as a fighter, an advocate. She would go to law school. She would work to ensure that no other child, no other scared 17-year-old would ever have to face what she had faced. The gavel had fallen, but it had not been the end. It was the beginning. Nia Jackson's conviction was overturned, her record expunged. The ordeal, however, reshaped her future. Inspired by her mother's fierce advocacy and her own harrowing journey through the justice system, she went on to graduate from Howard University and is now attending Yale Law School, focusing on civil rights and juvenile justice reform. Her case became a flashpoint in legal circles, leading to the introduction of the Nia Jackson Act, federal legislation aimed at reforming the felony murder rule for minors. Justice Monica Carter continues to serve on the Supreme Court, her quiet authority now underscored by a personal story that reminds the nation of the real-world consequences of the laws debated within the court's hallowed halls. Nia's story is a stark reminder that justice is not always blind, but sometimes it can be forced to open its eyes. If you were moved by Nia's story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others. To learn more about the fight for juvenile justice reform, please visit the websites of the Sentencing Project and the Equal Justice Initiative in the description below.